Kim Peets and welcome to My Story, His Story. What do we know about Seventh-day Adventist church leaders and how has God influenced them? In this series we take a closer look at the lives of these Christian leaders and invite them to share their stories with us. Here with me is Pastor Graeme Christian, pastor of pastors. Welcome, Graeme.
Hi, Kim. How you going?
Going all right.
Yeah, good.
Pastor of pastors, what's that?
Yeah, I guess it's about providing pastoral care to pastors. And, they're busy guys. They're looking after a lot of people and sometimes they need someone to talk with or someone to pray with them or someone to listen to them, someone to process some things. And that's part of the role. So, yeah.
Is that what you've always done since you've been in ministry?
Well, I started off as a church pastor and then I was asked to specialise in training. And I've worked with youth, been a youth director and family life, working in that area as well. So I've had a variety of roles, yes.
Family life, what's that?
Well, promoting healthy families and relationship development and that type of thing. Yep.
Okay. And where has this work taken you? You haven't just worked in Australia though, have you?
No, I haven't. We've had the privilege of working in Fiji. As well as other parts of Australia. I mean, we have worked I was the pastor of Lord Howe Island Church, which is a pretty special place to go. But we had 6 years in Fiji. And from there, we were in a regional office. We visited various parts of the Pacific, Tahiti a couple of times a year, and Cook Islands, and the two Samoas, Tonga, and various parts of Fiji, as well as Tuvalu. And it's out of Tuvalu that I want to share a story with you.
Please do. I'm all for stories.
Yes, it was actually the first itinerary that I went on to go out to visit believers who had been there for many, many years. But they hadn't been visited by anybody. They had been faithfully sharing the message about Jesus with other people. And I had been asked to go out there, and they told me that I was the first one to go and around that island group for 25 years. And the method of transport was very, very interesting.
What was it?
Well, it was a ship, but it was an old ship. I don't know the age of it. I don't recall the name of the ship. But it was a ship that we had been booked onto by the local pastor. And together we travelled around there. I went to have a look at where I should sleep and found that it was actually better to sleep on the deck because it was very hot next to the engine room. So I slept there and I can remember just being very close to the captain's room. And the sea was very calm, but the waves might have been maybe a metre high, maybe something like that. And every time that ship hit a wave, there was a great shudder went through the ship, just constantly shuddering. So I said to the captain, what is that? What causes that? And he said, oh, don't worry, the ship is strong. It's just the rivets that are weak.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just the rivets. That just holds the ship together.
Oh no.
So that really helped me to relax quite a bit.
Of course,
yes,
yeah. That would help me to relax.
Yeah. But I can remember lying there a few nights. Once I thought I was going over the edge of the boat, but I managed to stay on board. But that really isn't the heart of the story. Each time we came to an island, we would go on shore to just be with the people and spend some time listening to them, praying with them, sharing some things with them, doing some training and that type of thing. And to get onto the islands, we would get on. They lowered a little boat over the edge of the. When I say a little boat. It was probably about the size of maybe a 30-seater bus, that sort of length.
Okay.
And it had a small outboard motor on the back, and they would put all of their 44 drums of diesel and kerosene, like maybe 30, 44-gallon drums, and then all of their food supplies, and then all of the people who wanted to go on top of the load. So it was greatly overloaded, and then we would go in and get off and meet with the people. It didn't worry me too much. I love the sea. I've sailed in very stormy conditions, and this was quite calm, and it didn't particularly bother me, except for one island we came to, where they said to me, Graeme, be very careful here. And I said, well, yes, of course. But why? And they said, last time we came here, somebody fell over the side of the boat and was killed. And I said, oh, okay. And so I was very careful and didn't worry too much because I didn't really see any immediate danger. Yeah. So I wasn't really worried too much about what was going on because the sea was fairly calm. But when we went to the next island to visit again the people there who were searching for God and those who were already believers, I saw something that really did worry me. And I don't worry much. I don't get worried about a lot of things. I tend to relax about life most of the time. But I worried about this because as I was standing on top of this pile of 44-gallon drums in the middle of this boat with a very, very small outboard motor on the back. I don't remember if it was a 25 horsepower outboard, something like that, pushing a huge load through the sea. And as we came into the channel that went between the sea and the lagoon inside the reef, I noticed that the waves started to peak up. Now, I was on top of the load, and I'm not a short person, but the waves were about as high as my head. So they were 2 metre waves plus, I would think.
Okay.
And I looked around and I could see that the channel was probably about this much wider than the boat on each side. And I thought, this is dangerous. This is just very dangerous. And I started to get worried. In fact, the more I looked at it, I just panicked. And I said, God, I don't want to be here. And that didn't take the panic away. And I said, God, help me. And that didn't take the panic away. But then I just turned to him and I said, God, I really didn't choose to be here. I came here because of a sense that you wanted me to go and do some work for you. And you've put me in this place. And I just said, God, it's up to you. You finish the story how you want. My life is in your hands. Whether I like it or not, it is. Let me trust you. I'll just leave it to you. And when I said those words in my mind, you know, the waves were still there. They didn't go away. The coral reef was just ever so close to the boat on each side. The outboard was still small. Nothing changed except me. And I had a peace that God had given me, that whatever happens, God is in control. The circumstances didn't change, but he changed what was going on for me. And I praise him for that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that story. Stay with us after this break and Graeme will share some more stories with us. Welcome back to My Story, His Story. I'm talking with Pastor Graeme Christian, pastor of pastors. Graeme, I'm gripped to my seat hearing the story about you on the boat with the waves that are 2.5 metres high. Was that the end of the story?
Well, it was in a sense, but in another way it wasn't at all, because I had a very clear sense that God cares for me, and he cared about a simple thing like my fear of the waves and my fear of the danger that I could see, and he helped me to deal with that. And I'm thoroughly convinced that if God cared about my feelings and about what was going on for me, he cares about you just as much. And he cares about anybody in this whole world. And he'll respond to those who reach out for him. Sometimes we don't sense his response straight away. And I want to pick that up a little bit later. But now I'd like to talk about something that happened for me in Fiji when I did experience his presence very, very clearly. Fulton College is a Seventh-day Adventist training institution that's been established in Fiji, and many pastors and many teachers, many other people have been trained who have served the church and the community in a wide range of roles. Fulton College was named after one of the early missionaries who went out to Fiji to take the gospel story to those people. And it was in the chapel of Fulton College where this story happened, because I had been asked to go there to take the week of spiritual emphasis, and to fit that into my program I had to squeeze it in between two itineraries, and I did want to spend some time with my family because I was out of my bed for about 6 months of the year, most years that I was there. And so I wanted to be able to actually spend time with my wife and children, so it meant rather than going to Fulton College for the whole week, I went out there day by day, back and forwards, morning and afternoon, and trying to get some work done at the office as well. It was about an hour's drive each way, and I was already tired before I started. By the end of the week, I was absolutely wasted. Now, you need to know something about the Fulton College Chapel, just as an aside, just a quick little story here.
Oh, please do.
When it was first built, there was just a concrete floor. And you may have read some of the bedtime stories written by, we call him Uncle Arthur Maxwell. He visited there, as I understand, and he went back to a Western country and said to the people in a church service, he said, maybe we can raise some money to put some lino tiles on the floor to make it a nicer place for them to worship. And at the end of the service, there was only one person, and it was a child, who came and gave him their ice cream money. They said, I've been saving this for an ice cream, but maybe this will help. The next place he went to, when he told that story, he told the story of the ice cream money and how that was the only donation he had. And enough money was given to him for the whole chapel to be tiled. And right at the front of the chapel, there's just one red square tile to remember the story of the ice cream money and how somebody who was willing to give that money. And it was next to that tile where this story started. Because I came back on the Friday evening and I went down to the front of the chapel. The sun had already set. It was dark in there. There was nobody else. I knew the students would be coming soon. And I stood there next to the red tile and I just said, God, I've got nothing to give. I've just been working too hard. I've been trying to keep up. I knew what I had to say. I had prepared my sermon. I knew what I had to say, and I knew how it was all going to happen. All of that was done. But within me, I was wasted. I just had nothing. So Kim, I can remember just standing there next to the red tile and saying, God, I've got nothing to give. I need your strength. I want to do your work. I want to be involved in sharing the story of the gospel, the story of Jesus, but I just don't have the energy to do it. I'm just worn out. I went up and stood behind the desk that I was going to speak from, and I just felt the same, exactly the same. And then I discovered some stairs at the back of the stage, and they lead down to the library, I found out. And I just went on and sat on those stairs by myself in the dark. And I said, God, I've done my preparation, but if you can work through me, I'll be happy. I said, that's all that matters. You just work through me. I'm just going to give this over to you. And as I sat on the stairs, I knew that I wasn't alone. I actually remember looking around, but there was nobody there. But there was. There was someone there, just as real as you sitting there in that chair, except they were right beside me. True. And it was like water on a summer's day. It was like an oasis in the desert. It was like somehow I had new strength. that I didn't have of myself. Something changed for me. Something was different because God was at work in me, giving me new strength. And if God is willing to do that for me, I know He's willing to do that for others too. And after the break, I'm very interested to discover how David tapped into God's strength. God didn't take away the circumstances. I still had to give the talk. But He empowered me, gave me the strength to face what I had to face and to go and do it in His power.
Thanks, Graeme. I want to hear more of that. Stay with us after this break as we hear more from Graeme. Welcome back to My Story, His Story. I've been talking with Pastor of the Pastors, Pastor Graeme Christian. Graeme, I really enjoyed your stories. They've been so interesting and they've got a great message. Each of them have had an awesome message. Now, earlier you were talking about how you've learnt so many things from David, and I'm really interested to hear more about that. Yes.
David was known as a man after God's own heart, and that's something that has appealed to me for a long, long time. I've wanted to be the same, you know, to somebody who God wants to be with him, you know, someone after God's own heart, and so that's something that I've focused on a little bit. But there are times when I've felt close to God and known that He's with me, and there are other times when I haven't. And one of the things that I really like about David is that he experienced the same thing. Now let me give you an illustration. A few years back, I decided I wanted to learn the trombone. I love the trombone, especially those long ones with the extra stick on them, you know. They're just great. I just love that kind of music. And so I'd been away from home for a couple of weeks and I came home with a trombone. Now, we have a cat who thinks he owns me, and I'd just assembled this trombone and the cat was about to rub himself up against my leg when I let out the first noise that I managed to get out of the trombone. We didn't see the cat for a long time, and I can't play the trombone.
Okay.
Right? It had nothing to do with the cat, but it has a lot to do with practice, because the noise that I got out of the trombone was nothing like what I have heard others do. And I thought, this is a bit hard. And I've met some people who have wanted to connect with God and they've tried it but found that was a bit hard too. And so I just want to explore this a little bit, because when I discovered what David did and how he dealt with God and worked with God, I found it very encouraging. And maybe you can too, and maybe others can. So let me just have a look here at one of the Psalms that David wrote. Because in Psalm 3, we find an example of a pattern. You could find it in numerous Psalms. There's more than one pattern that David has. But in Psalm 3, I find a simple pattern. I'll tell you what the pattern is, but you could find it just by reading the Psalm anyway. But the first thing that David does is he tells God about what's going on in his life. Whether it's good or bad or ugly, whether he's fearful, or whether he's joyful or sorrowful or sad, whatever his emotions are, whatever his circumstances are, he tells God about it. Now, I've been able to do that, but I haven't always understood what he did next. The next thing that he does, after he's told God about his life and his challenges, and it's typically challenges that he talks about, the next thing that he does is he focuses on God. In this psalm, we just find him doing it very briefly. In other psalms, we find that he does it through singing, sometimes through meditating on God through the night. Sometimes he does it through singing through the night. Now, I don't know if he does it out loud. I certainly don't, because I have a wife who's trying to sleep. But sometimes I'll do that. And the other thing that David does after he's done that, he will remember the things that God has done for him, where he's seen God at work. And I find many people have stories like that. Even if they're doubting now, they have stories of when they could see God clearly at work in their lives or their families' lives, where there's been an answer to prayer. But that was many years back, perhaps, for some of us. And now the doubts come because what happened? Why isn't God answering my prayer now? And after David has focused on God, and after he has remembered the things that God has done for him, he experiences peace. I'll read it to you.
Please do. First
of all, let's go back to the first part of it. In verse 1, David said, Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. How they have increased who trouble me. I don't know, Kim, if you've ever had trouble. I certainly have had trouble. And I'm sure that many people have had some sort of trouble in their life. Many are those who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. So here is this man, a man after God's own heart, and people are saying God wouldn't help him. Now, I don't know if you've ever felt like God couldn't possibly help you, but I've felt like that. And there have been times, even after God has done amazing things or taken my fear away and given me a sense of peace or given me new strength, there are still times when I've wondered, well, God, where are you today? David goes on and he says, but you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. So God was a shield for David. This is who God was. He's starting to use describing words to say who God was for him. And then he thinks about what God has done for him. He lifts up his head. And then he says, I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. And so David has focused on God, and he's called out to him, and he's remembered the things that God has done for him. And then he says, I lay down and slept. So he's got a huge number of people who are opposed to him, and yet he's able to sleep peacefully because he has given it to God. And when he awoke, he says, I awoke for the Lord sustained me. So God had given him strength. First of all, he told God about his trouble. Then he focused on God and he meditated on God and he praised God's name, and then he had peace and new strength. And he goes on to say, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. The people are still there. They are still opposed to David, but he's got the strength that he needs to carry on with the job that God has given him to do. Somehow, God has not taken away his trouble. In fact, in terms of the circumstances that David faced, basically nothing had changed. The only thing that I find that has changed here was David. Because now he had strength and peace, and he was able to face the challenges. Now, the thing that I like about David is that as I observe what David did, it's actually pretty simple. And what's more, it's simple enough for me to be able to do it. And not only is it simple enough for me to be able to do it, but as I do, I find it makes a difference in my life, just like it did for David. There's a little song that says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.
Thank you so much, Graeme. There's so much to learn from that, and I really am glad that you could relate your personal stories to David. Thank you so much for joining us on My Story, His Story, and we hope that you join us again next time.